This story begins in the city, where we are introduced to a fortune teller also known as the Oracle, a beautiful blonde who was passing through and wanted to know what her future held in terms of her career. The young girl came from a wealthy family, so the fortune teller told her not to worry about it, but her response didn't please her, and she punched him directly in the face. The young man, whose name was Yukeka, our protagonist, walked away disheartened. As he strolled through the streets, a girl wanted him to read her love fortune, but he was discouraged and preferred not to do it. The woman insisted, and just then, a handsome young man in a car arrived. She wanted to know if someone like him would be in her future, but Keika responded unpleasantly. It seemed like the young man in the car was looking for someone. The protagonist's parents had passed away when he was young, and the family's financial situation hadn't been very good since then. Their ancestors had been excellent exorcists, but nowadays, they were nothing more than simple fortune tellers. When he got home, the neighbor was waiting for him. His laptop had issues, and he hoped Keika could fix it. Being a fortune teller wasn't enough to make a living, so he repaired electronic devices on the side. But he didn't always have the necessary spare parts. He had to scavenge for them, or rather, steal them from the trash. Late at night, while searching for spare parts, he heard more people nearby. It was the young man with white hair who had been in the car. Apparently, he had found the person he was looking for. They were having a struggle. The girl seemed to be possessed. Keika hadn't expected a yameshi to be around. The protagonist was impressed by what he was witnessing. He thought they were filming a movie with special effects. The white-haired guy noticed his presence and realized he could see the girl. He had powers. Keika introduced himself to them, couldn't stop talking, and the girl took advantage of the distraction to attack. She fired a burst of magic directly at the protagonist, but the guy deflected it, saying they were demon arts, and the impact would shatter the soul of a normal person. Keika had to get out of there immediately. Kaitanoku introduced himself to the protagonist. His mission was to purify spirits. In other words, he was an exorcist. Keika's actions had allowed his target to escape, and he mocked Keika, saying he was just a sorcerer exterminating yakai. He boasted about his ancestors, but Tanmoku had left without realizing. After witnessing this strange event, Keika returned home, thinking about how sad his life was. He had no wife, no children, and no good job. He wondered if things might be different if he were reincarnated. At that moment, a speeding truck hit him. Later, Keika woke up in a room and looked at himself in the mirror as if nothing had happened. He hoped he had been reincarnated into someone more handsome, but Tanmoku told him he was dead. The only thing left of him was his spirit. Keika thought he was joking, but his body had been torn apart in the accident. Keika cried in desperation. Meanwhile, on the news, it was reported that 47 accidents like the one he had experienced had occurred throughout the city that year. When people die, they go through 3 phases. They ignore the fact of their death. They refuse to accept that they have died. And finally, they experience intense emotions. The protagonist was acting like a madman. Tanmoku knew he was very confused and explained that when people die, they take on the form they had at their happiest moment. Keika remembered looking like that when he was in high school, still with his parents alive. On the other hand, Tanmoku wanted him to become his spiritual shadow. Some people, after death, remain connected to the world despite not having bodies. They are born with great spiritual power. The protagonist existed on the threshold between light and darkness, but after his death, he could only stay in that world for 7 days. If he didn't want to disappear, he had to become Tanmoku's shadow and make a pact with him. But Keika refused. He wouldn't take orders from a stranger. While Tanmoku was with the protagonist, he wondered if the risk he had decided to take was too high. Keika wandered around the hospital, thinking he could come back to life in another body, but Tanmoku was losing patience. After 7 days, spirits turn into specters, and he would be punished. At that moment, the specter from the trash reappeared and sent the protagonist flying with a shout. The girl was stronger than before. She wanted Tanmoku's spiritual powers, but he didn't let himself be intimidated and tried to eliminate her once and for all. However, she had captured the protagonist and wanted to turn him into a specter. A battle erupted in the hospital corridors. He couldn't focus on the fight. Keika was under her control. If he wanted to get him back, he had to give up his powers. He had to go to Mount Euro when he made his decision. The girl withdrew. In a change of scenery, the protagonist can be seen landing in a dark forest, surrounded by malevolent spirits. The girl prohibits them from touching him. He is her bait. In the past, exorcists used to have many schools, and only the best of the Tanmoku family held the title of yameshi. This young man was the leader of the clan, and his body concealed colossal spiritual power. If she obtained it, she would become invisible, and she could even be reborn in the world. After the girl's speech, the protagonist flees. He encounters Tanmoku in the middle of the forest, thinking he had easily deceived the girl. Tanmoku gives him some spiritual binding rings. When he puts them on, he will form a spiritual pact and become his shadow. It's his only salvation. Keika is possessed by the girl and reluctantly accepts. He knew that after making the pact, it would be irrevocable, and the energy would belong to her. But he underestimated Tanmoku. He realized it from the very beginning. They were surrounded by specters, and Keika was still under the girl's control. He is surprised by the exorcist's abilities, dodges the attacks, and throws the ring at him, joking that he didn't want to marry him, just use him for the rest of his life. Tanmoku grows tired of flattering him. If he didn't want to cooperate, he would end up defeating all the specters on the mountain, including himself. The protagonist finally decides to put on the ring, and the incredible power of the pact is unleashed. They manage to subdue the specter, who takes on the form of an innocent girl. She didn't want to leave this world, but Tanmoku purifies her as her presence was causing an imbalance between light and darkness. He reveals her true identity. In life, she was a serial killer. They receive a call, and their first job together is about to begin. The guys arrive at the airport, and Tanmoku is in a hurry. A beautiful girl is waiting for him, and he tells the protagonist that she is his fiancée, but he doesn't know if he's joking. She's important to him since they went out late at night to pick her up. Her name is Shiyu Shin. She introduces herself to the protagonist, and she can see him. She knows that he has become his spiritual shadow. As his fiancée, she wants to get along with him and considers them like siblings. Keika can't understand how he ended up with such a pretty girl, and the protagonist still doesn't get along with him. Shiyu will stay at the usual hotel, and the atmosphere in the car suddenly changes. Upon arriving, Tanmoku bids her farewell coldly, but Shiyu is happy to have met Keika. The protagonist wants to know why they are so cruel to her, but at that moment, he receives a call and is instructed to inform her about dinner at the Tanmoku mansion the next day. He is reprimanded for being his partner, not just a messenger. Tanmoku ignores him and leaves. He goes up to his fiancée's room, but as a ghost, he can't touch objects. He enters the room announcing his arrival with an important message for her. However, he finds something completely unexpected. The girl is annoyed by his interruption while playing video games. Keika knows how to play and helps her level up. Meanwhile, Tanmoku is purifying specters. Shiyu offers the protagonist a cup of tea and wonders why he acts differently when he's with his fiancée. She knows that he wouldn't like to see her like this. Regardless, neither of them cares about the engagement. They haven't even legally signed it. Despite having unrequited love for him, she is drawn to his appearance and is a fanatical admirer. At that moment, a specter appears before them and tries to take both of them. Tanmoku arrives just in time to help them. However, Shiyu doesn't want him to open the door. She's not wearing makeup and would rather die. The specter kidnaps them. In a flashback from the past, Shiyu is seen meeting Tanmoku. He was always out of her reach, belonging to different worlds. However, their destiny was determined from the beginning. He was always a star, and she was just a simple spectator. When they reached a certain age, they were engaged, and she was supposed to give him children and continue her family's lineage. People talked about their engagement, but Tanmoku always turned his back on it. Shoyu manages to wake up, and they are in a ghostly barrier in the specter's dimension. Keika still doesn't know how to use his powers and can't solve the situation. The specter tries to get into Shiyu's mind, ordering her to kill the protagonist for being close to her fiancé. She had made a great effort to get close to him. The specter says that none of her efforts were appreciated. On the contrary, he chose Keika as his partner before her. He was more important. Shiyu is possessed and starts strangling the protagonist. She wants her fiancé back. The protagonist is suffocating, even though he's already dead, and his body is slowly submerged. He wakes up in one of Shiyu's memories, realizing that she has been through a lot to be close to Tanmoku. At that moment, he saves her. The specter had completely taken control of her. He removes the darkness from her heart, and they must work together to help her. However, he can't use the powers of a Yaomeshi against humans, so he needs a spiritual shadow. He has to use a weapon. For that, he must imagine a suitable sword using his instincts, and the rings will create it. He concentrates and the sword appears before him. He had to be careful when attacking. Both energies were present, and if he made a mistake, corruption would accelerate. The protagonist boasted that he was good with that weapon in video games, but in real life, he wasn't a veteran. Tanmoku helps him in combat, managing to block all the attacks perfectly. Keika was trembling, feeling fear in the face of his power. However, he manages to concentrate his attack and free Shoyu. Tanmoku scolds her, telling her that members of his family shouldn't be consumed so easily. After seeing her intimate memories, the protagonist decides to support her, apologize. He knew she wanted to keep her love despite discarding her pride. It was dangerous to stay in that place, so they would go to Tanmoku's home. In a scene change, a man can be seen killing someone, and his subordinate calls him Tetsu, informing him that the man had returned with his spiritual shadow. The guys still hadn't reached Tanmoku's house. They should have arrived 2 hours ago, and it had been a day. He had bought a house far from the city, and the protagonist couldn't stop complaining. However, he hadn't realized that the entire mountain was owned by his family. Upon arriving at the mansion, the employees were excited about their return, but a young man who was alone didn't show the same enthusiasm. The butler tells him that everything was prepared, and he had a group of young girls at his service. The bitter young man approaches the room shirtless to see what the commotion was about. The butler scolds Ritsushido for arriving in that way and speaking to the master like that. He excuses himself, saying he was in a hurry and wanted to see his master's first spiritual shadow. In reality, everyone wanted to see the same thing, and if another tragedy occurred, it would be terrible. The butler gets annoyed and tells him to be quiet, but at that moment, Jun Tanmoku arrives, wanting to know why he was so hostile to his family. Shioyu explains to the protagonist that she was like the younger sister of his master. They had a complicated relationship, and it was clear that Ritsu didn't like the Tanmoku family. He hoped that someday they would pay for everything they had done. He leaves for the moment, saying he would return for dinner. Jun introduces his eldest son, Jaimai Tanmoku. He was the first spirit of his that the protagonist had met and uses a sarcastic tone. Tanmoku gets angry, and the atmosphere becomes tense. But just then, the lady required his presence. The grandmother is delighted to hear that things between Shoyu and him are fine. They take the opportunity to introduce the protagonist. Keika behaves as usual, without manners, but the old lady is happy that the leader finally has a spiritual shadow. She believes that he should take good care of him, and his parents would be proud. He is surprised by all the wealth surrounding his master. It's on a different level. Even the sacred mountain gathers energy from the cardinal points, and an altar was built there to maintain the balance between light and darkness. Later, Tanmoku arrives in the room with the protagonist, as he had to stay with him to protect him. However, Keika is very irritable and makes his job more difficult than usual. He wants him to leave and let him sleep peacefully. High in the forest, Tetsu's subordinate was watching the leader's room and saw the protagonist on the roof. She realizes that there is a protective barrier. Keika realizes how much his life had changed in the last 2 days and wonders if being a spiritual shadow had always been his purpose in life. The girl who was secretly spying on him attacks him by surprise, expecting him to be stronger since he was the leader's shadow. Tetsu appears before him, and upon noticing his presence, he realizes it's dangerous and tries to escape. However, he can't get away due to the barrier. Seeing how weak he is, Tetsu loses interest in him and orders Kao to eliminate him. They mock the protagonist, who acts like a comedian. Kao is small but is dominating him. She tells him that her master is the king of the Yaoma. Tetsu interrupts, saying there's no need to tell him anything. He doesn't even have his master's trust, so he must be eliminated once and for all. The protagonist decides to get serious, or at least pretend to be. In reality, he starts screaming for help as some yokai had infiltrated and were attacking. No one could hear him, and the only way to penetrate the barrier was by using demon arts. 2 servants who were in the courtyard were talking about the leader's shadow, hoping he would be talented. They see the protagonist on the roof asking for help, but they mistake him for a monkey and ignore him, walking away. Kao gets distracted while talking to her master, and the protagonist takes the opportunity to draw his sword and launch a surprise attack. He almost manages to hurt her, as he had been acting to deceive them. Kao gets angry, and the protagonist challenges her to a duel. She uses magic and transforms into a larger, more beautiful girl. Being larger allows her to use more demon energy, and the real fight is about to begin. Using her umbrella as a weapon, Tanmoku wakes up in distress, apparently having had a nightmare. Jaimai informs him that a monkey had infiltrated the premises, just wanting to check if he was okay. But Mount Yura is a place of demons. Monkeys didn't inhabit that area. He suspected that something was wrong. The battle between Kao and the protagonist continues. Tetsu confronts him, and Keika feels immense pressure, a mixture of human and demonic spiritual energy. Her real name is Yauko Senin, and no spirit knew about him. He used to be the spiritual shadow of a Yameshi, but now he was the master of Mount Yura. At that moment, Tanmoku appears. Yauko apologizes for interrupting his sleep, congratulates him on finding a new spirit and replacing it. Kai gives them the opportunity to leave peacefully. Kao was willing to defend her master, but in the blink of an eye, she was behind him, forced to be silent and retreat. Her body kept trembling. The protagonist mocks her, but Kai also orders her to leave. The yakai's intrusion was Jun's idea. He had conspired with his son, hoping that they would cause trouble. Kai orders him to stay away from his shadow. Yauko didn't want to fight and noticed that Kai was protecting him instead. Things had turned around. He would be a burden when he became a priest. He had to accept him as his shadow, but Kai refuses and orders him to leave and never return. If he truly wanted a shadow, he could find him whenever he wished. Kai reminds him that the mountain and his entire family belonged to him. It was his destiny. Tanmoku returns at dawn, and the protagonist is worried about him. He understands how complicated his close circle is. However, he acts like a snob, which irritates Keika. The spirits seek his energy, and he can't forget that he is also one of them. Shiyu prepares breakfast for her future husband, while the protagonist plays in the room with Kai. He remembers that he has exorcism powers in his hands, but he could still have a weakness. Kai reminds him that they established a pact, their souls were linked, and they shared their secrets, including their birth dates. The Yaomeshi kept that information secret, as someone might try to harm them. If he revealed his birth date to someone, they would both be finished. At that moment, his fiancée arrives and sees them together. She gets jealous and sends him flying. Shiyu tries to stay with him, but he rejects her. He wanted to rest. The protagonist meets the butler in the garden, thinking there was an intruder due to the noise coming from the master's room. He had a sword that had been in the Tanmoku family for generations. The leader had to use it in the engagement ceremony. An artisan had given it to his family centuries ago, and it bore the name of the first Yaomeshi, Rakugetsu Tanmoku. For generations, they had used it to exterminate specters and protect the world's order. Then, Ritsu arrives to interrupt their conversation, informing his father that the lady needed him urgently. He could take the sword in his place. The old man apologizes to the protagonist for his son's impertinence. Later, Ritsu takes the sword to its place alongside Keiko, warning him to stay away from Kai, or things would end badly for him. The protagonist agrees, starting to complain about all the terrible things that had happened since he met them. Both of them hated him. Ritsu asks for his birthday, but Keiko refuses to tell him. He could speak ill of him, but he wouldn't dare to kill him or harm him in any way. His response displeases Ritsu. Meanwhile, Jun was with his grandmother, apparently worried about something. Ritsu loses control and starts fighting the protagonist. Despite his hatred for Kai, he is no match for him. That's why he wanted to know his birthday. Keiko tricks him and tries to escape the room, but Ritsu catches him. His family could tame spirits, control them however they wanted, even him. He stabs his hand with his dagger, beats him up, and can't understand why the leader chose him. He tries to subdue him, but the protagonist uses his sword to defend himself. However, he's no match for someone like Ritsu. He gets overconfident, thinking that the protagonist being dead would be his revenge. But after being stabbed in the heart, he realizes that he can disappear and wants to get revenge on Kai by tearing Keiko's soul apart. After being stabbed, he has a strange vision with his master. Ritsu orders him to call him, but he's tired of being a laughingstock for everyone, so he refuses. He takes the Rakugetsu sword and manages to wound him. An incredible power briefly takes hold of him. Ritsu becomes frightened, but just before he could kill him, he has a vision and stops. He takes advantage of that moment to attack, but at that moment, Tanmoku arrives and receives a stab in the hand to protect him. Ritsu couldn't contain his anger. He tries to kill the leader, but the latter subdues him with a hold. He had to behave like his father. At that moment, one of the servants arrives and informs everyone about what was happening. His father kneels to apologize for Ritsu's actions and says he will personally take care of punishing. Jun mentions that Keiko was also at fault. He had used the sword to hurt Ritsu. They didn't know his past, which was a concern for everyone. He defended the Shido family for their services, as they were old friends of the family, and their relationship mattered more than Kai's shadow. Shiyu tries to defend her fiancé, but Kai loses patience and explains what happened. Ritsu had acted with ill intentions, and they couldn't forgive him. His father had been negligent, and both of them had to leave the house. In a scene change, Keiko is alone with Kai, knowing that he could have avoided the problem but suspecting that Kai was trying to shift the blame. He jokes about the fight, but Kai tells him that if he ever touched the sword again, he would cut his hands off. He explains that he had no choice, otherwise he would have disappeared. Tanmoku makes it clear that he should stop acting tough, and if something similar happened, he should call him immediately. The day of the ritual finally arrives, and Kai waits for the protagonist on the second floor of the mansion. He finishes getting ready for the ceremony, which purifies the celestial and earthly aura. It was the Yomicha's greatest duty. He helps the protagonist with his hair, emphasizing that he should never remove the cord made with some of his hair, as it binds their souls. He should not take off the rings, either, and should never forget who he is. He must promise this. Shiyu sits next to the protagonist, keeping an eye on him for being close to her fiancé. The grandmother accompanies them, saying that she will get used to living with her grandson and that he should be understanding. The guard stops the butler at the entrance, who arrives with the lady of the Shido house. Jun orders him to leave, and they are allowed to enter. Meanwhile, the protagonist feels his heart warm and his soul purified during the ceremony, as he watches his master with great admiration. The ceremony is about to end, and the Shido lady wants to know if the leader is sincere, so she hopes he doesn't feel guilty about anything. Kai has no idea what she's talking about. His cousin and former butler were fired by him. Shiyu and the protagonist get angry at her comment. She realizes that Kai's shadow is someone without manners and insults the prestige of the Yaomeshi. The grandmother intervenes, not knowing what was going on. Jun takes advantage of the moment to tell the story as he sees fit, but the old lady orders him to be quiet. She wants an explanation from her grandson. She takes takes the Rakugetsu sword and orders the protagonist to approach and kneel in front of him. Everyone thought he would publicly him. Still, he hands over the family sword, declaring him the 13th leader of the Tanmoku family, and no one could oppose it. From that moment on, their essences are united, becoming one soul. She publicly declares their union, and the Shido lady is furious for dishonoring her family in front of a stranger. On the other hand, the old lady is crying with happiness. From then on, Kai would be responsible for Keika's actions. If he doubted his shadow, it was the same as doubting the leader. The Shido lady lets her guard down and apologizes to the old lady. Jun would investigate the protagonist on his own. In a scene change, Jaimai, the secretary of the Tanmoku family, brings breakfast to the leader's room. His duty was to protect him, even from his own family. He enters the room and sees that the master is deeply asleep. Keika teaches him how to wake him up properly, screaming like a madman. Kai hits him for waking him up in that manner. Kai has breakfast early, and the protagonist is surprised by the wide variety of foods his master enjoys. Meanwhile, Kai smiles at his antics but also gets angry quickly. Later on, the Shido family suggests dividing the Western territory, and they also want 6%. They were asking for too much, but they had supported them for generations with their spirit tamers. The leader had been sleeping during the entire family meeting, practically sleeping all day. In reality, he slept almost the whole day, only waking up to eat. Later on, it's time for classes, and Jaimai accompanies him to protect. The girls idolized him. During class, he falls asleep, and the teacher gets angry, saying that being rich was no excuse for disrespect. He calls him to solve a problem on the blackboard, but he easily solves it and humiliates the teacher. At lunchtime, a cute girl invites him to eat, but he only accepts food from his family, who brought a large selection to satisfy him. The protagonist complains, and they start arguing. Jaimai enjoys watching them like this. Kai's routine was similar to that of a retired old man. He didn't work, his family was wealthy. Jaimai explains to the protagonist that his master was not an ordinary priest. His work as a yameshi involved large-scale purification. He only acted when there was an imbalance between light and darkness or when spirits became too agitated. Exercising was no longer his concern. He was only summoned in grave situations, just like his family members. The protagonist still didn't know that yameshi didn't aid. Jaimai has a flashback from the past when his grandmother mentioned the qualities the family leader should have and promoted Kai. Jun congratulates him, and despite not being a priority in the family, Jaimai never distanced himself from her. He would always protect her. Keika had dreams of the future with Kai, where they played in the snow like children. It wasn't the first time this had happened. Meanwhile, Tanmoku took him to the city where he used to live. It had been 7 days since he became a spirit. On the other hand, Jun was investigating the protagonist's history, and Jaimai was helping her. She couldn't understand why the leader had taken a stranger as his shadow. On the day of Keika's accident, Kai was near the scene and had sensed what had happened. He was the one who called the ambulance. Jun wondered about the real reason he had died. Keika searches through the apartment where he used to live, and Kai took him there to find something as a keepsake or of importance. However, he found nothing valuable in that dump, or so he thought. The neighbors missed him, and they were burning the money they owed him as a sign of respect. At that moment, some gang members saw what they were doing, got angry because they weren't paying for their protection, and beat them up. Tanmoku shares the breath of life with the protagonist so that he can help them. This allows him to interact with the world. He helps his neighbors, and the gang members flee in terror, having been chased by a ghost. At that moment, the lady sees the protagonist through a mirror, cries, and apologizes to him. She was worried and hoped he was in a better place. This moved him, and Kai immediately took him away from that place. The protagonist couldn't contain his feelings any longer and started to cry, realizing all the things he had lost in life. His relationship with his living friends had ended forever. Later, they decide to go to a nearby park to rest. It was still raining. Keika tells Kai how he met the lady and her husband during the first days of work. They had tough days, but someone like him couldn't understand it. However, Kai hadn't always been a member of the family. He leaves, leaving Keika alone. In a scene change, you can see his grandmother looking at a family photo from 9 years ago when he joined the family at that age. He was always very perceptive and talented, more hardworking than his father. Jun tells her not to be distressed about the past. It wasn't good for her health. Her parents were apparently cruel, but the old lady didn't want to talk about it. She decides to take a break, which is convenient for Jun because Jaimai has valuable information about Keika. The protagonist continues to have strange dreams, and his heart races. Meanwhile, in the news, they report that the city has been affected by paranormal events. They hope that citizens wouldn't panic due to false information. Uya was cleaning her room, and the lady visits her, informing her that she would pay the remaining rent for the protagonist. but someone had already paid it and even paid it in advance, describing Tanmoku. On the other hand, Kai searched for the gang members who had hurt the protagonist's friends to teach them a lesson. Uya didn't know what kind of relationship he had with the protagonist but didn't say much. Kai beats up the 3 gang members, and at that moment, the leader receives a call from the boss, insulting him for messing with someone from the Tanmoku family. He even apologizes to Kai but forbids them from interfering with Keika's acquaintances. After the incident, Kai gives the family crest to the protagonist, knowing it was valuable. It was the only memento he had from his parents. Tanmoku takes the opportunity to tell him about his past. His father died when he was born, and he lived with his mother. At the age of 9, his mother passed away, and he was summoned by the main family. At that time, he was just like the protagonist, and he understood his feeling. Keika apologizes for his words. Kai considered him part of his family, which he told the landlord. Keika thanks him for what he had done on the way to the mansion. At that moment, he has another dream with Kai, in which his master was about to die. This news devastated him. The food they had prepared was delicious, and they enjoyed dinner. But then, things change. Rakugetsu seemed to come to life after waiting for an eternity trapped in the sword. The protagonist sees all the deaths it had caused and took on Kai's appearance. Keika stabs his master in the dream, but upon waking up, he realizes he had also pierced him in reality. After being stabbed while driving, he loses control and crashes the car. The protagonist screams in despair, not knowing what he had done. In a scene change, Jaimai informs Jun that the protagonist is a descendant of Niyu, also known as the one-armed spiritualist, who killed the first Yameshi of the Tanmoku family. Jaimai had no idea and thinks of warning his grandmother immediately. Kai could be in danger, but Jun forbids him, knowing he was playing with fire. Moreover, if he died, she could become the next Yameshi. After the terrible accident, paramedics arrived immediately. Keika was in shock. His relatives arrived, and the nurse informed him that they had managed to stabilize him, but his condition was grave. Jaimai would take him home immediately, ordering the preparation of the Nenyu ceremony. His grandmother fainted upon learning of the incident. Shiyu approaches the protagonist and slaps him. Upon arriving home, Jun scolds him, but he only wanted him to survive. That was the priority. He tries to punish him but remembers Kai's orders. He was the only one who could do it, avoiding the death penalty, but he orders Jaimai to restrain him until the master wakes up. The ritual begins. Kai couldn't receive blood transfusions, as they had to maintain the purity of his body. Even his meals were carefully selected, as someone else's blood was practically poison to him. His fiancée had to perform the Nenyu ceremony, which was one of the requirements to be with him. She gives him her energy and life force. Shiyu wanted to talk to the protagonist alone after the ritual ended. Keika explains that it wasn't his intention. When he woke up, the sword had already pierced him. Shiyu was disappointed. He was avoiding his responsibility. Her job was to protect him, not to try to kill him. It was already late. Jun had replaced all the servants, and her grandmother was in bed. The doctor ordered her to be strict with the treatment due to her age. Jun was plotting something and gathered all the servants in private. Shiyu tells the truth to the protagonist. Many things would cause a collapse within the Tanmoku family. Kai didn't belong to the main family. His only allies were his grandmother and her. Jun assumed the role of the leader while both of them were unconscious. She would do her best to protect her family. Keika realized that his master was in danger. The ritual had weakened him a lot, which is why he had slept for 3 consecutive days. Still, he wanted to go out without fully recovering. She tried to stop him, but he did it because he knew the protagonist missed his home. There had never been a Yameshi who lived more than 30 years. They were willing to sacrifice their lives to fulfill their duty. At that moment, one of the servants handed Keika a suit that his master had left, just for a situation like the one that was happened. This suit would protect him. The protagonist cried desperately, hoping that his master would be okay. Shiyu could break the barrier in which Jaimai had locked her by using a talisman, but first, she had to pierce her chest with the sword. This way, she could know if his intentions were good. If he was lying, her soul would shatter, and she would suffer unimaginable pain. She does it without hesitation, earning Shiyu's trust once again. She warns him that by leaving the barrier, she would be in dispute with the family, but that didn't matter to her. She immediately goes to see her master. She talks to her master, feeling ashamed of what she had done and how she had treated him. She wanted to stay by his side forever, but right at that moment, Yauko enters through the window to retrieve her belongings. In a scene change, Keika remembers a conversation he had with his master about Yauko. She was his father's shadow, being the first to turn a Yauma into a spiritual shadow. If he saw her again, he should protect himself or flee if he had the chance. The Tanmoku barrier didn't affect Yauko, and she entered easily, starting to fight against the protagonist. Meanwhile, one of the servants informs Jaimai that Shiyu had released Keika's barrier. She would inform her mother later. Kai wakes up, trying to protect Keika, but he wasn't in a condition to fight. Yauko calls Raujioku, ordering her to test her shadow. She wanted to know why she protected her so much. Keika was taken to another barrier, and had to fight against her subordinates, with Kao appearing again. Keika attacks her desperately, but Raujioku stops him with just one hand. She would be his opponent, and before suffering defeat, he had to sever the pact with his master. The protagonist gets distracted while boasting, but she wasn't as generous as Kao. She cuts off his hand in the blink of an eye. The clothes wouldn't protect all parts of his body. Raujioku is an embodied demonic sword, and she can cut through anything. His hand had returned, but it hurt when she cut it off. Jaimai locks Shiyu in a room. She needed to reflect on what she had done. She would release her in a couple of days, leaving everything in the hands of the protagonist. But she didn't know that he was receiving a beating despite having clothes imbued with spiritual energy. Meanwhile, Yauko enjoyed the fight, and Kai couldn't do anything in his condition. Raujioku begins to strangle the protagonist. Yauko stops her and orders them to rest. He would take care of it. Kai had placed a restriction on the protagonist because he couldn't sense it. Shadows and Yameshis had to share their souls and energy. They couldn't survive without each other. However, his pact with Kai was one-sided. If he died, nothing would happen to his master. He tries to provoke the protagonist, but he reminds him that he was still alive even after his Yameshi had died. Yauko gets angry and pierces his chest with her hand. Keika was on the brink of death. He remembers his master's words. His vision was clouded. He was tired of always being protected. He wanted to meet his master's expectations. At that moment, he grabs the Rakugetsu sword and transforms. The one-armed spiritualist, Niyu, instilled fear in everyone. Kai had chosen the protagonist for that reason. He returns the favor to Yauko's subordinate by cutting her arm. His ancestor didn't hate Yama, but he served the greatest demon. If he were still alive, he would have terrified them. Yauko knew she couldn't rival him because he was his direct descendant, so she surrendered and gave him a miraculous medicine from her clan. He had to give it to Kai. She informs him that the Tanmoku family was planning a coup, and if she allowed anything to happen, she wouldn't forgive herself. He returns to normal and gives the medicine to his master. It takes effect immediately. They leave the room in silence and flee from the mansion. Jaimai was spying on them and informs Jun. Kai wasn't angry with the protagonist for what had happened. On the contrary, he apologizes for not protecting him. The clothing he had given him was to protect him from people like Ritsu. They head to their master's house. Kai's master was blind, and he went to him because he needed a favor. He would make an equivalent exchange. He kept his teachings in mind but wanted to defeat him in combat to gain access. He realized that his master was injured and that he would never defeat him in that state. So, he could only make the exchange, but he had nothing of value at that moment. The master let him win in combat, and Kai couldn't contain the pain, causing him to faint. Later, he ordered his subordinate to find medicine to cure him immediately. He asked what Kai wanted, as he was willing to risk his life. Kai was seeking information about the sword. It had sealed his spiritual power, and the Rakugetsu had sealed its power. He needed to dissipate his soul and answered his question. If he wanted him to continue helping, he had to give something in return. He knew that the protagonist was important, so he decided to have a conversation with him in private. The master challenged him to a duel, and if Kai won, victory would be his. He began to attack, and everyone was angry with him for what he had done to his master. The protagonist held his sword and transformed. He was only repentant towards his master. The others didn't matter. Kai was worried about his master, checking the strength of his shadow, which was astonishing, but he still didn't know the full extent of his powers. Keika won the fight, and the master answered his second question. The seal would disappear when the sword returned to its sheath. What happened next, he didn't know. Kai's spiritual powers had disappeared after being stabbed and sealed. The sword had been forged by a craftsman obeying the will of heaven. It could kill Yama and demons, calm specters, and punish the Yameshi. If a Yameshi succumbed to evil, their powers were sealed with the sword. Some time ago, Kai had cut himself with it, weakening his powers but not losing them. The protagonist was the only one who could extract the powers of the sword. In a scene change, the master talked to his subordinate, saying that it was best that he didn't find the sheath so that his pupil could avoid his fate and return to being himself. The boys searched in their home and also in their parents' grave but found nothing. Kai decided to return home. Meanwhile, Mrs. Shido wanted to talk to the leader of the Tanmoku family. She went to the foyer, claiming that she wanted to pay her respects to the master. She had learned that he was injured. Jun told her that her cousin was resting and that she should leave. She warned them that the shadow would bring misfortune to the family. Her master was paying the price. Shido showed them a seal containing several specters that the master had asked her to exterminate. Sealing them had required a great effort. She insisted on seeing Kai. The seal could only contain the specters until dawn, and if they were released, no one would be able to control them. Jun, after receiving the threats, also mentioned that she had heard rumors about the Yaomeshi losing his powers. At that moment, the old lady woke up and made her presence known. Kai was heading to the Tanmoku mansion with Keiko, wanting to regain his powers as soon as possible, as the specters would be looking for him to kill him. The protagonist suggested that he resign from his position, but it wasn't that simple. A mysterious figure appeared in the middle of the road. The conversation continued at the Tanmoku mansion. Jun apologized to her grandmother for not informing her due to her condition, and told her the whole truth. The old lady ordered Jaimai to find the leader to verify if the rumors about his powers were true, but one of the servants informed her that he had disappeared from the mansion, with only an hour left before the specters were unleashed. If the Yaomeshi didn't return by then, things would spiral out of control. Shiyu was trying to escape from the room. Meanwhile, Ritsu had destroyed Kai's car. He wanted to while he was weak. Still, Keiko attacked him. He had improved since their last encounter. However, Ritsu was after Kai. They managed to dodge his attack and fled into the forests. Ritsu was provoking them, and they shouldn't confront him. As a Dominator, he was their natural enemy. Kai planned to use talismans. They stopped him temporarily, but Kai had no choice but to flee. He couldn't defeat him without his powers. However, he didn't blame the protagonist for what was happening. He could barely stand. Meanwhile, Shiyu decided to stop acting like a lady and show her true personality to escape. Kai ordered the protagonist to leave him behind if Ritsu caught up to them. He tried to ask for help but was refused. Nobody could see him in that state. After losing his powers, he felt he had no reason to live. Keiko realized he depended on that to feel safe. In the end, he was only human like everyone else. He lied to him about his death. If he kept the cord made with his hair, even if he died, he wouldn't disappear. He ordered him to leave. He couldn't continue protecting him. He released him from his promise. At that moment, Ritsu found them. He was ready to fight to protect his master, but Kai placed a talisman on his forehead and sent him flying. At that moment, he had memories of his ancestors. They had also parted ways, and Raingetsu had chosen his death in his own way. He met Yauko in the middle of the forest and asked for her help, but she couldn't leave the Yura mountain of the Tanmoku family. She couldn't arrive in time without him being dead when she reached her master. Yauko ordered him to look at the sword. It was manipulating him with hallucinations, and she no longer wanted to allow it. But he was wrong. The swords had the emotions of their creators. If he wanted to master Rakugetsu, he couldn't reject it. He had to understand them. Keiko managed to see Shisai's memories, who had been banished by his master's orders, just like him. He wanted him to be free and see the world in his place. He forged the sword from his arm and never stopped wielding it until his death. He only wanted to stay by his side. The protagonist finally understood the sword's feelings and adopted the form of his ancestor, returning to protect his master. In a scene change, Shiyu escapes from the storage room, and the noise reaches the old lady's ears. She orders one of the servants to inspect. Mrs. Shido could no longer contain the power of the specters. They were about to be released. She tries to deceive the old lady, but if Jun performed the purification, it was like abandoning Kai. However, the Yaomeshi had abandoned them, so at the very least, he should be relieved of his duties. Shiyu overhears the conversation in secret. Meanwhile, the battle between the protagonist and Ritsu begins. His power increases immensely, but the Dominator had a trick up his sleeve. He used the Shido family treasure, the Kaimai talisman. No spirit could escape its power. When he was attacked by the object, Keiko had memories of the past. It seemed like he could see some relatives performing a ritual, and everything around him was destroyed. Kaimai attacked the weakest part of his heart, turning his puppet into his prey. Kai, in his last breaths, interrupted the fight. Ritsu confessed to the protagonist that his master had killed two people important to him, which was why he hated him with all his soul. The dispute continued in the Tanmoku mansion. Mrs. Shido continued to make negative comments about the Yaomeshi. She claimed that he was illegitimate and an outsider, never having to take that position. But everyone knew that, all because of the Shinryu woman. The old lady got angry upon hearing that comment and ordered Jun to remove her from her property immediately. The situation was about to get out of control, and Shiyu revealed herself to them. Ritsu provoked the protagonist to attack him, taking advantage of the moment to remove the cord from him. He had them under his control. He used a spell to torture Kai with the protagonist's cord, wanting him to suffer before dying. On the other hand, Shiyu was furious with Mrs. Shido for the things she had said about her fiancé. She was shameless. Everything she had was thanks to the Tanmoku family, who had always protected them. However, she still didn't accept her fiancé as a Yaomeshi. The protagonist didn't want to see his master die, so he decided to sacrifice himself so that Kai could regain his Yaomeshi powers. The specters began to emerge, and Jun tried to contain them. Her grandmother didn't want him to become a Yaomeshi to prevent him from suffering. She hoped he would live a normal normal life. On the other hand, the evil part had taken over the protagonist's soul, driving away the specters in the forest and trying to strangle Ritsu. But Kai stopped him, trying to remind him who he really was, but he couldn't change his mind. On the day the protagonist died, Kai saw his Rakugetsu. They had a conversation, and he realized he was destined to succumb to evil just like him. He had been sealed by the Yu for generations, and now his time had come. After Keika's soul disappeared, no one could stop him. But Kai wouldn't let him, he would protect him. He made a bet with Rakugetsu that he wouldn't let him become a specter for a whole year. He laughed and accepted. He wanted to see how much he could defy the will of heaven. Returning to the present, Keika's corrupted soul was strangling Kai. Evil had taken hold of him. He pushed him aside and tried to kill Ritsu, but Kai pierced him with the sword. He wasn't giving up so easily. Rakugetsu, taking control of the protagonist's body and soul, laughed at Kai, but he was willing to give his own life to recover Keika. On the other hand, Jun managed to purify the specter, and Mrs. Shido urged the old lady to name her as the next Yameshi. She had the necessary qualities, but Shiyu disagreed. They should wait for the return of her fiancé. Shiyu displayed a part of her incredible power. If Kai didn't return before sunrise, she would offer her body to become the next Yameshi. Keika had promised her that he would return with her fiancé, and she trusted him. The protagonist's soul awakened in a dark place. He saw his parents and was confused. He heard his master's voice, but Rakugetsu didn't let him take control. Kai managed to defeat his evil part, but he was about to disappear. Ritsu took advantage of the moment to counterattack and surprise Kai. Things got out of control, but at the last moment, the protagonist returned to normal and saved his master. He humiliated Ritsu, always observing Kai. He was a pure human, trying to give everything to the world, but no one rewarded him. He was tired of seeing him suffer, so he would end all his enemies and punish them in his place. It was his duty as a shadow. Dawn was about to break at the mansion, and Shiyu could no longer defend Kai. Jun had to become the next Yameshi, but at that moment, Ritsu crashed in front of them. Finally, the protagonist arrived at the mansion along with Kai in an epic manner, ready to face anyone against them. Mrs. Shido was shocked. Kai ordered her to find the scabbard. He would take charge. The protagonist left without objection. Before reaching the mansion, Kai told him that the scabbard was hidden in the plaque, the only important memento of his family. He had left it in his room. Everyone was worried about Kai. They learned that Ritsu had stopped them and realized the Shido family's betrayal. Suddenly, the specters started moving again. It seemed Jun's powers were not enough. Kai had to do it. But Mrs. Shido knew he hadn't recovered his powers yet. Keika found the plaque, destroyed it, and inside it was the scabbard. The specters unified into a giant one, and the situation spiraled out of control. Jun used a barrier to protect her family, and Shiyu protected Kai, who was badly injured. If things continued like this, he would die. She tried to touch Kai, but the protagonist intervened. She had no authority to give orders to the Tanmoku leader. He drew the sword back into its scabbard in front of everyone, and a giant light emerged from Kai toward the sky. His master and Yauko saw it from afar and smiled with satisfaction. The old lady was thrilled to witness her grandson's spiritual power. Kai regained his incredible powers, purified the specter in a second, and even the seal broke. The Shido family quickly apologized. Kai told the protagonist that the relic he had in his ear regulated his power. He had been merciful and restrained himself. Mrs. Shido knelt before him, apologized, saying it was all a misunderstanding. Later, the old lady punished them severely. After the battle, the protagonist accompanied his master to the room to rest. His fiancée saw them in a compromising situation and got angry. On the other hand, Jaimai told his mother that it was best to leave things as they were. They had only made a small mistake, and they should correct it in the future and be careful with their shadow. Before falling asleep, Kai allowed him to interact with the world, so he decided to play video games with Shiyu. Yukeika's life had changed completely. He had become Kai Tanmoku's spiritual shadow. He still had many things to discover about him, but giving up was not one of his qualities. Kai hid a terrible secret, and he knew he wouldn't be forgiven when he found out. Rakugetsu's soul had not yet disappeared, and he was determined to put an end to everything. And that's how the first season of this anime ends. If you've reached this part of the video, let me tell you that you've been one of the few people to make it this far. So comment the word spirit in the comments. Remember to subscribe to not miss any videos. With that said, see you in the next video.